The Middle East, a region long defined by its intricate rivalries and simmering conflicts, once again finds itself standing on the edge of a precipice. The recent and alarmingly direct military exchanges between Iran and Israel have shattered a fragile status quo, replacing a shadow war with open warfare. This escalation represents one of the most significant shifts in the regional security landscape in decades, threatening to draw in global powers and ignite a much wider, more devastating confrontation. The world watches with bated breath as the drums of war beat louder, understanding that a single miscalculation could unravel the entire fabric of regional stability, with consequences that would ripple across the globe, impacting everything from energy markets to international security alliances. The current crisis did not emerge from a vacuum. It is the culmination of years of proxy battles, covert operations, and escalating rhetoric. However, the recent series of events has taken this long-standing animosity to a new and dangerous level. In an unprecedented move, Israel launched a multi-day aerial campaign, striking deep within Iranian territory. The targets were not just military installations, but also critical infrastructure, including nuclear facilities and oil refineries. This direct assault on the Iranian state was met with a swift and forceful response, as Iran launched hundreds of missiles toward Israel, demonstrating a capability and willingness to strike back that has reset the strategic calculus for all parties involved in this complex geopolitical chess match. The human cost of this new phase of conflict is already tragically high and continues to climb, a stark reminder of the real-world impact of these strategic decisions. In Iran, reports from human rights observers indicate that hundreds have been killed, including a significant number of civilians, with many more wounded. Similarly, in Israel, missile strikes have brought death and injury to civilian areas, turning city streets into scenes of chaos and grief. These casualties are not mere statistics. They are individuals, families, and communities torn apart by the violence. Their suffering underscores the immense human tragedy that unfolds when diplomacy fails and military action becomes the primary means of communication between nations. As the cycle of attack and retaliation intensifies, the risk of a full-scale regional war becomes terrifyingly plausible. Such a conflict would not be confined to Iran and Israel. It would inevitably draw in neighboring countries, destabilize fragile governments, and potentially involve global superpowers who have deep-seated interests and alliances in the region. The potential for a catastrophic misjudgment is immense, where a defensive action by one side is perceived as an unprovoked aggression by the other, leading to an unstoppable spiral of violence. The delicate balance of power that has for years prevented a major interstate war in the Middle East is now under its most severe strain, threatening to break entirely. Against this backdrop of open hostilities, a clear and forceful message has emerged from Tehran. Speaking on the sidelines of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation gathering in Istanbul, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi delivered what can only be described as a diplomatic ultimatum. He articulated Iran's position with stark clarity, warning that any direct military involvement by the United States would be a catastrophic error. Araghchi stated that such a development would be, quote, very unfortunate and, more pointedly, very dangerous for everybody. This was not a subtle diplomatic suggestion, but a direct warning about the grave consequences of American military intervention, framing it as a red line that, if crossed, would plunge the entire region into an unpredictable and violent new chapter. Araghchi's comments in Istanbul were aimed squarely at Washington, signaling that Iran views the United States as a key player in the current crisis, whether it acts directly or not. He made it clear that a return to the negotiating table, particularly concerning the suspended nuclear talks, is impossible under the current circumstances. His message was unequivocal. Diplomacy cannot coexist with aggression. We cannot enter into any negotiation with the United States and the other parties when our people are under bombardment, under the support of the United States, he declared. This statement firmly links the cessation of hostilities to any future diplomatic engagement, effectively placing the ball in Washington's court to de-escalate the situation. Furthermore, the Iranian foreign minister outlined a specific condition for stopping Iran's retaliatory strikes. He stated simply that if the Israeli attacks on Iran cease, Iran's responses will also cease. This presents a clear, if challenging, path toward de-escalation. It is an offer of a tit-for-tat stand-down, shifting the onus onto Israel and its primary ally, the United States, to halt the initial aggression. By making this public pronouncement, Araghchi is attempting to frame Iran's actions as purely retaliatory and defensive, a necessary response to an unprovoked attack on its sovereignty and its people, thereby appealing to an international audience for understanding and support. This diplomatic posture from Iran serves a dual purpose. On one hand, it is a direct challenge to the United States and Israel, warning them of the severe risks of continuing their current path. On the other hand, it is an attempt to seize the diplomatic high ground by presenting a pathway to peace, contingent on the actions of its adversaries. By demanding a halt to aggression as a precondition for talks, Iran is testing the international community's commitment to diplomacy over conflict. Araghchi's words from Istanbul are therefore not just a reflection of Iran's anger, but a calculated strategic move designed to shape the international response to a crisis that threatens to spiral out of control. A central pillar of Iran's argument is the assertion of direct American complicity in the recent Israeli attacks. While the United States has officially denied any role, Iranian officials insist they have solid and convincing evidence to the contrary. Foreign Minister Araghchi has been adamant, stating that Iran has concluded the United States has been involved from the very beginning. This accusation transforms the conflict from a bilateral dispute between Iran and Israel into a confrontation with a superpower. Tehran alleges that the scale and sophistication of the Israeli strikes would have been impossible without significant coordination and support from the United States, including the use of American military bases located throughout the region. The basis for these Iranian claims appears to stem from a combination of intelligence assessments and public statements from American officials. Araghchi has specifically pointed to comments made by the United States President, who, while denying direct involvement, also spoke of American leadership and the essential role of American equipment in the operations. For Tehran, such statements are not seen as incidental remarks but as tacit admissions of support. This perception, whether accurate or not, has hardened Iran's stance, leading its leadership to believe they are not just fighting Israel, but are engaged in a proxy conflict with the United States itself, making any trust-based negotiations nearly impossible. In response, the United States has maintained a consistent and firm public position of non-involvement. President Trump stated unequivocally that the United States had nothing to do with the attack and has urged Iran to return to the negotiating table for a new nuclear deal to prevent further destruction. However, this message of de-escalation has been coupled with a stern warning. The president also cautioned that any Iranian retaliation against American assets or personnel would be met with an unprecedented American response. This dual messaging, a denial of involvement mixed with a threat of massive retaliation, creates a complex and ambiguous strategic environment that could easily be misinterpreted in the heat of a crisis. This dynamic of accusation and denial has poisoned the well for diplomacy. Iran has publicly demanded that the United States issue a clear and unambiguous condemnation of the Israeli attacks as a prerequisite for rebuilding any semblance of trust, stating that private assurances are insufficient. The United States, however, is unlikely to publicly condemn the actions of its closest ally in the region. This impasse has led to the suspension of the sixth round of indirect nuclear talks, which Araghchi labeled unjustifiable while Iran is under attack. The deep-seated mistrust, fueled by Iran's accusations and the perceived ambiguity of the United States' position, has created a diplomatic vacuum that is being filled by military action. The potential for direct United States military involvement in this conflict represents the most dangerous variable in an already volatile equation. Should the United States move from its current position of alleged support to open participation, the conflict would morph from a regional crisis into a global one. A direct confrontation between the United States and Iran would be devastating not only for those two nations, but for the entire Middle East and beyond. It would likely trigger a far wider war, destabilizing key allies, disrupting global energy supplies, and creating a new and massive refugee crisis. The risks of such an escalation are immense, with a high probability of unforeseen consequences that could haunt international relations for decades. The strategic logic for avoiding such a scenario is compelling for all sides. For the United States, becoming embroiled in another major war in the Middle East would be a monumental drain on military, economic, and diplomatic resources, with no clear endgame or guarantee of a favorable outcome. For Iran, a direct war with the United States would be existentially threatening, risking the destruction of its infrastructure and the collapse of its regime. For the region's other nations, such a war would bring chaos to their doorsteps, threatening their own security and economic stability. The shared interest in avoiding this worst-case scenario should, logically, be the most powerful incentive for de-escalation. Therefore, the only viable path forward is through a concerted and immediate push for diplomacy and de-escalation. This requires more than just calls for calm. It demands tangible actions. It would necessitate a halt to military strikes, the establishment of reliable back-channels for communication, and a willingness from all parties to step back from their maximalist positions. The international community, including powers like the European Union, China, and Russia, has a critical role to play in facilitating this process, acting as mediators and providing guarantees that can help rebuild a modicum of trust. The alternative is to allow the cycle of violence to continue its deadly spin. Ultimately, peace and stability in the Middle East cannot be achieved through the barrel of a gun. The current crisis, sparked by direct military attacks and fueled by accusations of foreign complicity, serves as a stark reminder of this truth. The warnings issued by officials like Abbas Araghchi should be taken seriously, not as mere rhetoric, but as an indication of how close the region is to a point of no return. Prioritizing diplomacy is not a sign of weakness. It is an act of profound strategic wisdom. It is the only way to pull the region back from the brink and ensure a future where security is built on mutual respect and cooperation, not on the ever-present threat of war.